March 1943. Vickers-Armstrong Testing Grounds. Military observers stand 50 yards from a target. A commando raises a strange-looking rifle and fires 7 rounds. When he finishes, not one observer can identify what just happened. One witness says it sounded like a door closing. Another compares it to a pellet gun. The weapon in that commando's hands was about to become the most terrifying thing German sentries never heard. Welcome to History of World War II. Subscribe if you want stories nobody else tells. Now let me show you how one British engineer solved a problem that defeated every military on Earth. And he did it by accident. While breaking the law, the year is 1942. The war is at its darkest point. German forces control continental Europe from the Atlantic coast to the gates of Moscow. The Japanese Empire stretches across the Pacific. Britain stands nearly alone, battered by years of bombing, rationing, and relentless pressure from enemies on every front. But in the shadows, a different kind of war is being waged. A war of sabotage, assassination, and raids behind enemy lines. British Special Operations Executive. Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare sends commandos into occupied territory to destroy, disrupt, and kill. These men operate in the darkness. They slip ashore from submarines onto French beaches. They parachute into Norwegian mountains. They creep through the forests of Yugoslavia and the deserts of North Africa. Their missions depend on one thing above all else: silence. A single gunshot behind enemy lines means mission failure. It means German patrols descending within minutes. It means capture, interrogation, execution. One sound and everything falls apart. The commandos needed weapons that could kill without making a sound. What they had instead were compromises that got men killed. But somewhere in England, a solution already existed. Built by a man who had no idea what he had created. Hidden in a workshop where it was being used to break rationing laws. The military just hadn't found it yet. Every silenced weapon in the Allied arsenal had a fatal flaw. Every single one. The Welrod pistol was the quietest weapon the Allies possessed. 73 decibels. Barely louder than a conversation. So assassins loved it for close-range work. You could press the muzzle against a sentry's back and fire, and his comrade 10 feet away might not hear a thing. But the Welrod's effective range was 7 yards. Maybe 30 if your target was standing perfectly still, and you were an expert marksman. Beyond that, accuracy vanished completely. The sights were crude. The barrel was short. At 50 feet, you were guessing. And the suppressor degraded after 10 to 15 shots. The rubber baffles inside broke down from heat and pressure with every round fired. By the 15th shot, the suppressor was failing. By the 20th, you might as well be firing an unsuppressed pistol. Each mission required fresh weapons. Commandos carried multiple Welrods, knowing most would be useless after a single engagement. 1 sentry per weapon. That was the math. The silenced Sten gun offered more firepower. 32 rounds in the magazine. A proper submachine gun. But it created a completely different problem. The Sten was semi-automatic. Every shot cycled the action. Metal sliding against metal. Springs compressing and releasing. The suppressor reduced muzzle blast, but the mechanical noise defeated the entire purpose. Fire it in a quiet corridor, and German sentries would hear the weapon working, even if they couldn't hear the shot itself. And here's the fundamental problem that doomed the Sten from the start. It fired 9mm parabellum ammunition. Standard European pistol cartridge. Velocity, 1120 feet per second. That's supersonic. Do you know what happens when a bullet breaks the sound barrier? It creates a crack. A small sonic boom that travels outward from the bullet's path. And no suppressor ever designed can eliminate that crack. You can silence the gun. You cannot silence the bullet. Physics wins. Every single time. The Americans tried a different approach. The high standard HDM fired. 22 long rifle ammunition. Tiny cartridge, low velocity. President Roosevelt watched Bill Donovan fire it in the Oval Office and never heard a thing. Impressive demonstration. Terrible combat weapon. The .22 long rifle lacked stopping power. You could hit a sentry center mass and watch him stagger away, still conscious, still capable of raising an alarm. The bullet was too small, too slow, too weak to guarantee an instant kill. What Commandos needed was a rifle. Real range, real stopping power. Real silence. What they got were pistols pretending to be enough. And here's what most people don't realize. The Germans faced exactly the same problem. They had superior engineering, greater industrial capacity, more resources, and they failed completely. Experimental MP40 suppressors were tested at Kummersdorf in 1943. They worked in the laboratory, but they required special subsonic 9mm ammunition that was never mass-produced. German logistics couldn't handle special cartridges for specialized weapons. The suppressors gathered dust because the ammunition didn't exist in supply chains. Carabiner 98 rifle suppressors were prototyped but never issued to combat units. Same problem. Standard German rifle ammunition was supersonic. Physics couldn't be negotiated. Both sides were trapped. The laws of physics seemed to make truly silent firearms impossible. But there was a solution. It had been sitting in British armories for months, waiting for someone clever enough to recognize it. And that someone wasn't a military engineer with government funding. He was a civilian poacher who had been building homemade suppressors since he was 16 years old. William Godfrey de Lisle was born in South Africa in 1905. By age 16, he was experimenting with homemade suppressors. He fashioned them from cocoa tins, fitting them too. 22 rifles so he could shoot rabbits quietly on his family's property. This wasn't military research. This was a hungry teenager who didn't want to scare off his dinner. He refined the concept over 20 years, building better designs, testing different configurations, learning what worked and what failed, all in his spare time, all for shooting small game. When war came, de Lisle joined the Ministry of Aircraft Production, just another engineer working on airplane components. His suppressor expertise remained completely unknown to military planners. Nobody thought to ask what he did in his spare time, till meat rationing forced his hand and changed the course of military history. Britain in 1942 was hungry. Meat was strictly rationed. Protein was scarce. And William de Lisle looked at the rabbits running across the Berkshire Downs and made a decision. He built a silenced .22 to Browning pistol specifically for poaching. Late evenings, quiet shots. Fresh rabbits for the table. Technically illegal under rationing laws, de Lisle didn't particularly care. The pistol worked beautifully. It's quiet enough that nearby farmers never heard a thing. Accurate enough to take rabbits at reasonable distance. Reliable enough for months of illegal hunting. Then Major Sir Malcolm Campbell saw the weapon. Campbell wasn't ordinary. He held world land and water speed records. He had pushed machines faster than any human in history. More importantly, he served in combined operations under Lord Louis Mountbatten. He understood exactly what Commandos needed. When he watched de Lisle fire that poaching pistol, he understood immediately what he was looking at. Not a poaching tool, an assassination weapon. Campbell brought de Lisle to Combined Operations Headquarters. The demonstrations that followed proved the concept beyond doubt. De Lisle fired from the roof of the new Adelphi building in London, shooting into the River Thames. Pedestrians on the embankment showed no reaction. They never knew shots were fired above their heads. Another test at Wilkes Gunmakers near Piccadilly involved firing across the street at a chimney. Shoppers walked past. Traffic continued. Nobody noticed anything. If you're finding this story fascinating, drop a comment below. I read every one. The Ministry of Aircraft Production released de Lisle for full-time weapons development. The rabbit poacher had become a weapons designer. But could he solve the impossible problem? Could he create a weapon with real range, real stopping power, and real silence? He was about to find out. De Lisle's first attempt failed. He tested 9mm parabellum ammunition, the same cartridge as the Sten gun. Same velocity, same sonic crack. Same physics problem that defeated everyone else. Then he tried something different. .45 ACP, the American pistol cartridge. 230 grains of lead moving at 830 feet per second. Comfortably subsonic. No sonic crack. No physics problem. And stopping power that 9mm couldn't match. A .45 caliber bullet caused devastating trauma. Targets went down instantly and stayed down. But here's the brilliant part. The part that makes this story remarkable. The solution had been sitting in British armories for months. Thousands of rounds of inherently subsonic ammunition already paid for through American Lend-Lease, already distributed across Britain. Thompson submachine guns and Colt 1911 pistols, both used. 45 ACP. The cartridge was everywhere. No special procurement required. No new production needed. Sometimes the answer isn't in a laboratory. It's in the warehouse nobody thought to check. De Lisle selected the short magazine Lenfield Mark III as his base. The standard British infantry rifle. Proven, reliable, readily available. But the critical decision was the bolt action. Unlike semi-automatic weapons, a bolt action creates no cycling noise, no metal sliding automatically, no springs compressing. The shooter controls every sound. Work the bolt slowly, and the only noise is a soft click. The suppressor design was revolutionary. 16 inches long, integrated permanently into the weapon, not an attachment. Part of the rifle itself. The barrel came from Thompson's submachine guns, cut to 7 inches. Multiple vent holes drilled around the circumference bled gases into the suppressor before the bullet exited. This ported barrel reduced the gas pressure that creates a weapon's report. Inside the suppressor, 10 to 13 duralumin baffles arranged in a spiral forced gases to swirl transversely. This Archimedean screw configuration progressively reduced gas velocity through each chamber. By the time gases exited the muzzle, they moved at near ambient pressure. Virtually no report. No pop, no crack. Nothing but the bolt cycling and the thump of the bullet hitting its target. The counterbore muzzle prevented vacuum collapse. Normal suppressors create low pressure behind the bullet. When atmosphere rushes back in, it produces a crack. De Lisle's flared muzzle profile eliminated this entirely. The finished weapon weighed 7 pounds 8 ounces. Overall length, 35 inches. Effective range, 200 yards. Sound level, 85.5 decibels. Let me put that in perspective. A normal rifle produces 160 decibels, louder than a jet engine, painful to unprotected ears. The Welrod achieved 73 decibels but couldn't hit anything past 30 yards. Modern suppressed handguns with 80 years of advancement produce 117 to 140 decibels. The De Lisle Carbine achieved 85 decibels with 200-yard range. That's roughly the volume of a vacuum cleaner. Imagine a vacuum cleaner that can kill someone 200 yards away. And nobody between you and the target hears anything except maybe a soft thump. That's what William de Lisle created. Ford Dagenham produced 17 handmade prototypes in the factory toolroom. Final assembly occurred in the manager's air raid shelter, converted into a secret workshop. Summer 1944, Sterling Engineering received a contract for 500 carbines, 450 standard commando models, 50 airborne variants with folding stocks. But the prototypes went immediately to commandos for raids along the French coast in late 1943. The first combat reports came back. Sentries died silently. German garrisons never heard the shots. Commandos completed missions that should have required firefights without firing a single audible round. The weapon worked. But what happened in Burma would prove just how devastating a truly silent rifle could be. British snipers positioned themselves near roads behind Japanese lines. They carried de Lisle carbines. They waited in dense jungle undergrowth, invisible and silent, watching convoys pass. Ian Skelton recorded what happened. Snipers silently dispatched a Japanese soldier in each lorry that passed. The lorry would stop when the driver realized something was wrong. But as no shot was heard, Japanese forces found it hard to believe they had been fired upon, or from where. 2 or 3 snipers working one road killed 3 or 4 soldiers in each passing vehicle. Lorry after lorry, body after body. No gunfire, no muzzle flash. No sound except the thump of bullets hitting flesh. The Japanese couldn't identify the threat. Men died around them without explanation. It wasn't combat. It was a haunting. What do you do when your soldiers die and there's no enemy to fight? When bullets find targets without sound? When the jungle itself seems to kill your men? The psychological effect was devastating. Japanese units became paranoid, afraid to travel roads that had been safe for months. Morale collapsed from pure terror of an invisible enemy. If this story has you hooked, smash that like button. It genuinely helps. OSS Captain Mitchell Warbell used de Lisle carbines in Burma. His testimony was precise. We worked a couple against sentries before raids, and they were something else. Better than the stuff we were issued. Merrill's Marauders used them to terrorize and scare the Japanese at night and in ambush. Merrill's Marauders is a legendary American long-range penetration unit, specifically requested de Lisle carbines to create fear. Night ambushes where Japanese soldiers died without explanation. Patrols that returned missing men, and nobody could say how. The most detailed testimony comes from Major Dymack, Royal Scots Fusiliers. Malayan emergency. His diary entry from February 1955. I and my platoon tried out a new weapon today. The de Lisle silent carbine. It was rather uncanny. There was no bang whatsoever. Just the click of the firing pin, the whiz of the bullet, and the thump as it hits the stop bank or body. December 1950. A training demonstration. A de Lisle fired 5 rounds 50 yards from the audience. Not one person realized a rifle had been fired until they were told. 5 shots, 50 yards. Completely undetected. The Sterling contract was terminated December 20th, 1945. V-rocket attacks destroyed much of Sterling's records. The war's end eliminated urgency. Only 106 carbines were completed against a contract for 500. The 50 planned airborne folding variants were canceled entirely. Only 1 or 2 prototypes exist. One survives at the Small Arms School Collection in Warminster. Total production, approximately 130 weapons. Fewer than crew, a single destroyer. Fewer than fill 1 infantry company. And those 130 weapons changed special operations forever. Post-war service continued through Korea. The Malayan emergency from 1948 to 1960 saw extensive use. General Gerald Templer was photographed firing one in Malaya in 1952. Some carbines were reconditioned at Enfield specifically for continued jungle service. Here's what makes the de Lisle remarkable from a modern perspective. 80 years later, with computer-aided design, modern metallurgy, and acoustic engineering software, we struggle to match what de Lisle achieved with wartime materials and workshop tools. Armament Research Services concluded the de Lisle remains close to the zenith of quiet operation in a shoulder arm. The zenith, the peak, the best ever achieved. 8 decades of development, and we're still trying to reach what one British engineer achieved in 1943. The Heckler & Koch MP5 SD shows clear debt to de Lisle's work. The Russian ASFAL uses similar principles. Mitchell Warbell, that OSS officer from Burma, developed the Max suppressor series for Vietnam Special Forces, directly influenced by his wartime experience. Every modern integral suppressor owes something to those cocoa tin experiments. Every special operations unit carrying suppressed weapons works with concepts de Lisle pioneered. Modern reproductions cost $6,500. In America, any de Lisle requires dual federal registration as both a short-barreled rifle and a suppressor. British patent 579,168, filed May 1943, remained classified throughout the war. The specifications describe improvements achieving gas exit at sufficiently low velocity as to produce very little or no sound. Engineering, language for what operators experienced as near total silence. William Godfrey de Lisle never received public recognition during his lifetime. His weapon was too classified, too specialized, produced in too few numbers for fame. He died without medals or ceremonies, but the operators who carried his weapon knew what they had. They knew they could complete missions that should have been impossible. They knew they could kill at 200 yards while standing beside enemy soldiers who never heard a thing. In Burma, Japanese soldiers died wondering what invisible force killed them. On French coasts, German sentries fell without hearing the shot. In Malayan jungles, insurgents learned to fear the silence between the trees. 130 weapons. One engineer who started with cocoa tins and ended up creating the most effective silent killing tool of the entire war. Sometimes solutions don't come from laboratories with unlimited budgets. They come from curious people who spend decades perfecting their craft, who solve problems for their own reasons, who never expect their work to matter beyond their own backyard. De Lisle wanted to shoot rabbits quietly. He ended up arming commandos with weapons that changed history. The sentries who died never heard the shot. Their comrades never identified the threat. And British commandos completed impossible missions with a weapon that began as an illegal poaching tool. That's what happens when unconventional thinking meets urgent need. But the de Lisle wasn't the only strange weapon British engineers created during the war. There was another project, more ambitious, more dangerous. A weapon so unconventional that even Churchill had doubts. A weapon deployed in one of the most audacious raids of the entire war. Next time, we'll tell that story. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. If this story surprised you, share it with someone who loves military history. Comment below if you'd ever heard of the de Lisle before today. Thanks for watching History of World War II. We bring you the weapons, tactics, and people that shaped the greatest conflict in human history. Hit subscribe and the bell for new stories every week. Until next time, remember, sometimes the quietest weapons make the loudest impact on history. I'll see you in the next one.